Hello, welcome back to the channel. I had a few topics I wanted to cover, both ideas held over from last year, primarily literature analysis. But specifically today, I was thinking about media and medium. And media is Latin, if I'm not mistaken, for the middle, which is actually a really good way to term just what media is, right? Where are you? Maybe in the middle of life, and the media is a depiction of that. So when it comes to this sort of broadcast, what it is it's very closely related to television. If you've noticed on social media that the advertising, the shows themselves, even if created by a non-corporate entity, they are representative of and shaped by and molded by years of television production and viewing and creation, right? And first, which brings me to kind of my first point about the medium is that for having an entire culture, like in America here, for having an entire culture, let alone a world shaped by medium, which television, which has only been has been going for, almost 100 years now. But that's only a few hundred years longer than the Gutenberg press. And also, more specifically, is that the radio came and went kind of before that, and the telegraph and all these mediums further shaped how we did business, how the environment was shaped, which further conditioned behavior. So uh, if you take what television means, it means vision at a distance. It's easy to maybe think it means the tele is related to telos, for instance, like teaching or education or purpose thereof, but it's vision or distance rather. And then the vision is obviously, vision, what you see. And it's not that you're seeing anything at a distance because that's the illusion of the media, right? Just like when you look at a stone statue, even if it's picture perfect, lifelike, you might get closer and see, oh, he had to shape and shade certain parts of the body and face to actually create that effect. If you've ever seen 3D chalk art or art on the ground that's slanted to make it create the illusion of depth perception, right? So basically that's what TV is, and it actually does push people inwards. This gets into McLuhan-esque territory. That's Marshall McLuhan, media critic, American or Canadian scholar. I've talked about him before on this channel, but he's actually going to come up here in the course of this video. More interestingly, was to say that um, that he kind of talked to people about it and he warned people about what this medium was actually doing because it was making our culture more introverted. He would point out, like, look at the younger Americans. They liked the hula hoop and the pet rock, and they were kind of a silly and frivolous culture. You weren't supposed to take the media seriously. It's like maybe there was enough family or social entity at work there keeping people together that the media hadn't completely devoured everything. Reality getting to Baudrillardian territory, right? And by that I mean the hyper real, where what's real is what's copyable. So going back to my first point of saying that what you see first and foremost is that these media and these medium, uh, they are meant to mimic TV. And by that I mean don't expect anything from them. You can't actually expect results or anything to change. And we're going to get into that when I start playing an audiobook that I have here that we're going to do a little philosophy react to. But first, I'm going to continue kind of going on here. This is to point out, I bring all this up to say, look in this wider structure here of just the media, right? We are talking about power relations, but we're not even talking about corporation or state or people. We're just saying within the media. So what's it made of? Well, the people who do the writing aren't the same as the people who appear on screen, are not the same as the people who the media product is designed for, right? To sell the information, to get them to buy, whatever the purpose is. If you took journalism 101, your journalism teacher here in America should have taught you that this exists to sell ad space. This media, this medium, it exists to sell product. Your writing is supplemental to that. Your work, right? It's not creative, it's not inventive, it's trying to report what happened. It's written at about a fourth grade reading level. so the general public can understand it, but understand that the general public is a recent invention, just like the reading public was an invention of the Gutenberg press, then the general public. And then what Marshall McLuhan was talking about was that with a media world and a global village, what you get is uh, well, you get a lot of people on top of each other. So it's the death of polite and private society. So if people don't understand, why can't people have privacy? It's because that's the age we live in, and people are mad about it. Um, the other side of it was to point out that, again, if you look at what I was just describing, it was structures, not of necessarily power, but different classes of people within that thing of power, right? So you have audience, then you have actors and spokespeople and representatives, and then at the top you have, the people in the back rooms writing the scripts, fabricating the reality, as quickly as they can to keep up with the fact that there's all sorts of problems all over the world, and there always has been, right? But in the creation of late modernity was, right, we wanted it to be hula hoops and skirts forever. And if it can't be that, then let it be, uh, World War II era victors forever, then baby boom forever, right? And then, and then as our future kind of tapers off, we're left to say what kind of reality. And it's like, well, it's a media shaped reality where the people were turned into the product, right? When I said that the media pushes people inward, is they're not meant to engage. It's not like picking up a book where you're questioning what does the author mean and you're thinking yourself with your own thoughts. It kind of does that, but it's a one-way process. You could argue that you can never put in or take out what isn't there. So then it goes to show you the capacity of the people who know how to make use of, from the script writers and the marketers at the top, who know how to sell to the people in the middle and the bottom, right? So I hope you're beginning to see a picture, because let me frame it in terms of the banality of a sitcom. A sitcom is a situational comedy. In America, they've almost never been funny. You almost never find a situational comedy that's funny unless it's a cartoon. But taking any of those, for example, like Full House, is that it's supposed to be representative of life, and then you question, who is this made for? Because it's so mediocre and inoffensive that you can just turn your brain off to watch it, and that's exactly it. You realize a lot of these things, they're just safe places for advertisers. Everyone who's been around on YouTube for a while is aware of things like the YouTube adpocalypse and how business kind of changed there when they realized, like, oh, we're letting too many of the common, the dirty people on here, right? They're getting in the way of our curated, perfect corporate message. So there are these complex dynamics at work, but I'm just pointing out how in one area that determines culture and reality for everyone, how already within that you have multiple classes of people who don't necessarily mix, right? And I've talked about this on this channel before. Like doctors and nurses hang out with their own, cops and soldiers, artists, that kind of thing, right? They tend to, philosophers and musicians, right? They kind of go like that. From there, it is a question of how the new medium changes the environment, because let's set social media aside, and then let's say that we're speaking human beings. All we have is an oral culture. There's no such thing as a grammatical error because grammar hasn't been invented yet we can communicate somehow. Somehow someone winds up inventing language. It's these people work together to create this record keeping process, let's say. And then in that, there's someone who goes, "Pff," his name's Socrates actually. And he goes, look at these kids. They're writing things down. The next thing you know, we're not going to be talking to each other like this. We're going to be writing things down, and we're going to be off in our own little worlds. And, this is just the death of the world, is the death of society. When in reality, it's a catalyzation and it's a furthering, and it's like an information transfer and a heating up process. So, and this is where it gets into what McLuhan differentiated hot from cold media. So when I say there's a difference in who creates the media, who consumes it, that's to point out that the first thing I noticed about this media and medium, especially working with other people who work on YouTube or podcasts, is that the creators do not think the same as the consumers, right? And you can think from the seller's perspective, of course. There's producers and consumers. Therefore, there's the people who have the capital and create the goods and have the target and can develop the target audience they want to attract. And then there's the people who have the options of buying, not buying, or buying something else, which really isn't much of an option at all because that's what the society of pure advertising purposes has driven us to, is that everything has taken on its own meaning. The original human meaning of the basic survival algorithm of living day to day, getting enough food, making sure people can get to work on time, and that the machinery doesn't break down. You could tell that in the fantasy, we lost the plot. And this is the Baudrillard sense of it. This is what post-modernity is. It means just more modernity. And what was that? It was a dream conjured up by a different people at a different place and time who changed form and shape and the scale at which they operated, but still primarily operate under the same medieval substructures that the church did in previous eras. It's just the only difference now is the church is one more business and it's tax free, of which there's no point any church should or could be tax free, circa, at least in the West, in 2025, because there's so many better options for your simulation of survival and recreation, right? Who would want to go to church? It's boring. You see better things on TV, right? You see where I'm going with this? Uh, so the media changes the way we do business, changes the industrial scale. And it's hard to say that, what is money? Is it a currency? Is it a belief system? No, I think it's the process by which human beings, at least here in the West, have shed the future of its possibilities, right? What can we build? What can we create? And by that, you actually exhaust possibilities by exhausting people themselves. And what if you did create a world where the youth and the young could no longer create novelty or surprise, right? This is kind of the direction we've been heading in for a while. What appears on the media is there to not think about it, to not worry about it, right? Or, we're so, it's so everyone's so bombarded with it that the blitzkrieg has become normalized, both the manufacturing of consent and the way the information is trivialized, banalized, and then you just forget about it. And they basically explain it so you can forget about it. If it's on TV, it's there so it can be made unreal for you. So you don't have to worry about the nonstop wars. So you don't have to worry about all the plagues and famines going on in the world, especially right now, circa 2025, where, again, if civilization is the hospitable and habitable simulation for suitable breeding, then obviously, it makes sense that everyone wants to check out into their own worlds. So we occupy different realities. It's no different than any other point in time in history where, for lack of better terms, to use old world archaic fuddy-duddy terms, human consciousness, right, quote unquote, um, the human consciousness emerged from the void just in time to see itself disappear back into it, and that it can't actually have a permanent purchase here, a permanent roost. And I say that in the sense of a Heideggerian being and time sense, and then he never wrote the second part, but I would suggest Peter Sloterdijk's philosophical work, Infinite Mobilization, as the conclusion as to what that momentum can entail then. Because if it's all a heating up process, that's a moving target. And, cooling down takes time. So anyway, the point is history never ended. It's still heating up. But modernity was the illusion that, hey, we can just exist like this forever. But it turns out there's not enough resources to give everyone in the world that middle class American dream existence. I mean, you could find it here, kind of like Kurt Vonnegut Jr. player piano style. You look anywhere and you got a million homes that all look the same. And like the book says, here you got 3,000 dream homes for 3,000 people of the same dreams. And that's not a judgment against people or the system or anything like that. It's just to point out that it's the nature of mass audiences, mass marketing, and basically a society that's run like a factory farm that runs the rest of the world as its offshoots of a factory farm. What am I really getting at here? It's to say that it doesn't matter what you watch on the media, it's all bad and it's all bad for you. It's designed to turn you into a zombie. If you've seen the movie My Dinner with Andre, I got a clip of it here on the channel. Um, there's this part in the movie where the guy says, he's kind of having this realization. This is back in the 70s where he sees that the whole world is heading in this giant mechanistic direction, right? And he says, the city is the new model for the concentration camp. And that's might sound extreme, but it's just incidental. It's the cost of doing business. Is to quote American professor Rick Roderick, that you can all the homeless people, all the obsolete people, all the chaos, all the protests, all the fighting. You can see it in that as more and more people fall through the cracks and fall prey to the madness of post-modernity. People left to lose their minds or take Prozac like normal people, right? Everyone's going off in their own directions. It seems like the species life is flashing before its eyes as everyone makes all the last discoveries they can, creates all the philosophies they can, you know, uh, develops all the artwork they can, push all these media and medium to their most extreme limits, including sports, mind you. Um, Getting to the point that uh, it doesn't matter whatever you're watching, just by fact of the fact that you're watching it. Generally, that's what's bad. There's no such thing as good TV. I'm just recapitulating what other people have said. This was kind of the subtext of McLuhan, even though people naively didn't understand him, which again we're going to get into here momentarily, which I'm excited to do for our first kind of philosophical audiobook react here on Sharper Pen Image Consulting. But I think that kind of covers it, because the main points were to say, look how differently the class divides are in the media and the medium. Look how different people use different media and mediums differently, right? There isn't a unified belief. There isn't a unified society. Americans aren't a unified front or people. They're very scattered. They're very city to city, state to state. And I just point this out because I know I have a lot of criticism here. But what I can say is that our media is monolithic, because look at all these classes here, all subject to one umbrella, all working in concert to one direction. And what is it? It's not even a product. It's just the show, and the show must go on, right? Leviathan needs to eat. And that's a lot of, there's a lot of collateral damage and incidental damage in that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here just to make sure this saves correctly. And then I'll go on ahead and we'll resume. All right, here we go again. And it's funny, I brought up My Dinner with Andre because in that movie, one of the friends says to the other, along with, the direction that the world was heading in, this kind of super dragon called Leviathan, was that he says he feels like all the advertising, all the propaganda, it's all there to turn people into little chittering robots, right? To wind them up, to get them excited, to help them exist within this schizophrenic state where they help build and maintain the prison, where they are the prisoners, right? And then the funny thing about media is that, that's just a good take on it, because it's absolutely the truth. No matter where you go, what you hear, what you do, it's all designed primarily to take your dollar, right? That's what it's about. It's about that shit called money. But also, it's to shape political beliefs. It's to overthrow political regimes. It's power at work in the world. It's no joke, which is why the character also says this is all dangerous territory. This is exactly the kind of thing that people freak out about, what's acceptable, what's not. The most interesting thing in modern terms is political correctness. And what's that? It's an intellectual barrier and filter to keep the proles, or the lower stratum of society, from entering a workforce that they are not sophisticated enough to navigate. Well, but getting off in the weeds here. What we're actually going to go to here is this audiobook. Now, I'm not 100% sure what IP and copyright laws are these days, but since this is transformative content, and it's already at this point going to be more of my work than his work, this is Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander. Now, first off, notice the pen name, pretty clever, Jerry Mander. And this isn't so much a something to say like that it doesn't seem like he realistically believes that people are going to eliminate TV. And obviously nobody did, and it only got worse, and we got more channels, and it's dumber than ever. Rather, this is him filling you in on kind of the politics, the backstory, what's going on, the momentum, the hurry up, rush and make money to get nowhere kind of side of things. It wound up being this nihilistic feeding frenzy. It's why I mentioned that anything in the media is there to essentially be neutralized or captured and contained, because it's all someone else's factory, essentially, right? And behind the scenes, behind the production, it's basically an unprecedented kind of feudal system. Take America, for instance, right? You got a state with millions and millions of people, and it's got what, a handful of representatives. So in feudal terms, that's like a feudal lord having, millions of peasants to himself. So it's kind of incredible what we've built at scale. But it wasn't building at the scale that was the hard part. The trick was selling it to them. How do you get the schizophrenic to both build it and be the proper type of prisoner? The well-disciplined, well-maintained, self-sufficient, automatically Prozac taking, automatic deficiency fixing unit of social organization, kind of like ants, right? Because anyway, let me get going here. Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander.
Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander. Read by Dave Parrott. Introduction. Chapter 1. The Belly of the Beast. If this book has any basis in authority, it lies in the 15 years I worked as a public relations and advertising executive. During that time, I learned that it is possible to speak through media directly into people's heads and then, like some otherworldly magician, leave images inside that can cause people to do what they might otherwise never have thought to do.
Translation. Like Uncle Ass and the Deadbeats, it's mind control. Or like that stupid movie Inception. I know a lot of people liked it, but it was really stupid. But it illustrates, if you watch, it looks like a corporate commercial of an action movie within a corporate commercial that's supposed to be a human being's dream. And it's like, no, these aren't lived in spaces. These aren't humanly habitable spaces. This is corporate flim flam, right? What this guy is saying is he became an expert in flim flam and how to sell the world flim flam.
At first, I was amused by this power, then dazzled by it and fascinated with the minutiae of how it worked.
See, I talked about these things belonging to different classes, the different aspects of the production of the production of the perpetual public works production, is that with the different classes is that a lot you see that people are very naive about where they're at in the pyramid, and from there that a lot of people don't understand the power gasm of it. Like if you had the power to treat everyone like children, because if you know, like in America, whether you're in school, the factory, or the prison, these people are treated like children, right? So if you had that kind of power, like human resources kind of power, that kind of thing, again, you just don't understand. You haven't had it to know why it's got to be this way.
Later, I tried to use mass media for what seemed worthwhile purposes, only to find it resistant and limited.
So even when they're trying to be good, they're evil. They can't help it, right? They can't. This is the nature of the media and the medium. Rather, what's behind it, right? The people and their aim, their vision, and what they're projecting at a distance.
I came to the conclusion that, like other modern technologies which now surround our lives, advertising, television, and most mass media predetermine their own ultimate use and effect. In the end, I became horrified by them.
That was when I said when things take on their own reason, when I think I said that earlier at least, or when human beings ceased being the center of things. Never mind, like in the medieval ages where it was at least thought that man was some sort of spearhead of God's creation and yada yada, so on and so forth. Anyway,
as I observed the aberrations which they inevitably create in the world. In
TikTok,
retrospect, I can see that an absurd little revolt against my family led me into
Twitter.
advertising work. My parents wanted me to choose a profession or to take over my father's business.
What happened to poetry and philosophy? It was murdered by advertisers. All those people who might have been artists or otherwise kind of intelligent, they sleaze and squeeze right in to this You know what, this, I don't want to sit here ragging on the nihilistic production of it, so I'll probably edit this out.
They felt that while advertising was already a lucrative field by the time I was seeking a way into it in the late 1950s, it was still very chancy for Jewish boys. They were
Well,
certainly right about that.
he said it.
Directly out of the Wharton School of Business and then Columbia Graduate Business School, I was denied a job in a Park Avenue ad agency because your hair is a little kinky. You might want to try 7th Avenue.
It's like they knew. See, they knew. No, I'm just kidding.
7th Avenue was what I was fleeing. My parents carried the immigrants' fears. Security was their primary value. All else was secondary. Both of them had escaped pogroms in Eastern Europe. My father's career had followed the path familiar to so many New York immigrants: Lower East Side, scant schooling, street hustling, hard work at anything to keep life together, early marriage, struggling out of poverty.
Yep, out of poverty, they bootstrap themselves up by their bootstraps to perpetually bootstrap the bootstrap of the bootstrap. Um, Heard you like bootstraps, dog, so we got you some bootstraps for your bootstraps. If you should take anything from this, understand that the class warfare is over and no one ever stood a chance. That's what the takeaway should be.
Curiously, success came to him during the Depression. He founded what later became Harry Mander and Company, a small service business to the government.
Harry Mander and Company, right? See, bootstrapped up by the bootstrap. But we are living in a very different time, and I want to point out that even the romance created around this area, like early self-reliant, good old-fashioned grit, stick-to-it-ive Americanness is going to get the job done and win the war and the perpetual war, right? That by the time they were even projecting those images on TV back to media and medium, was that, like, I'll give you an example. In David Foster Wallace's essay E Unibus Plurim, he points out that by the time Leave It to Beaver was on TV and you're seeing the probity and the hardworking ethics of an American like Hugh Beaumont, is that the corporate world had already destroyed the small business world largely, that the little guy had already been squeezed out, that this small town, quaint America was giving way to alcoholism, addiction, abuse in the family, molestation in the church, just chaos everywhere, just being repressed until, as you can see now, after degenerate decade, is that, it's all come to the fore. It's all exploded at the surface. And this is why people drink or take Prozac to be happy like normal people, right? So, getting back to the point here, another example that Marshall McLuhan talked about was Bonanza Land. And this is getting into boomer territory, right? This is a relic. We're doing some archaeology here. So, like a million years ago, when the show Bonanza was on TV, it was a Western. But by the time the show was on TV showing these American Western values, um, while the people lived in that simulation of reality, and you can imagine, right, the cowboys and Indians, and the kids had cowboy and Indian birthday parties, right? You see how these things kind of play out. By the time they were living in that simulation of reality, that reality was, 50 years past, 100 years past, because, that was just turn of the century, just last century. So, this guy's talking 1970s here. This is getting towards the end of last century, which, back to My Dinner with Andre, was saying, this is almost like the last creative burst, and all that creative capital gave birth to something new.
Garment industry, manufacturing pipings, waistband, pocketing, and collar canvas.
Exciting
One of the reasons
things.
for my father's
See,
success
none of
during
that's
hard
sexy.
times was World War II. He was beyond draft age and so was free to do a successful trade in servicing the manufacture of military uniforms. After the war, the business grew in new directions as the economy spurted forward into an era of rapid growth. Nonetheless, I decided his business wasn't for me. I had planned something much flashier for myself, something with greater glamour. It was snobbery, I suppose. By then, when I thought about my career, always a hot topic around our house,
Right.
certain images would fly through my mind.
Career is kind of a luxury that was manufactured last century that doesn't really exist like it does anymore. Neither do people identify themselves necessarily with one career path, because Americans have long been simple. And if they didn't identify themselves by the high school they went to, right, shows you kind of the mindset that's cultivated by a TV culture. But if they're not identified by the high school they went to, then they're identified by what you call it. Not well, the program's on TV, obviously, because it shows you the class that they're whoever's advertising to. But you kind of get where I'm going, I think.
Since so many of the images were from the ads of the period, the world of advertising
That's it. The fantasy to sell the fantasy, to buy the fantasy, to afford the fantasy, right? It's just like a Ouroboros, right? It's just a society devouring itself in spectacle.
seemed appropriate. There was something about that lifestyle, those big cars, the great white yachts, the polished people on them, and the life of leisure and pleasure. The dream. It wasn't so much that I was especially interested in wealth or that I ached to have all the goodies that were being shown in the ads of the
Right, right. I'm sure every American would say the same thing.
1940s and 1950s. I didn't want to own the cars and yachts so much as I wanted to be like the people who did. More, I wanted to help
Powergasmic is what he means.
create those images, to be around models, artists, photographers, and writers whom I imagined to be the sleek and sophisticated
Business people are not the same as artists. Ugh.
people. Despite some early setbacks, such as that Park Avenue experience, by 1966 much of my dream was realized. By then, I had already concluded a successful career as head of a theatrical publicity agency and joined a celebrated San Francisco ad agency, which became Freeman, Mander, and Gossage. We concentrated on so-called class clients: Triumph, Land Rover and Rover cars, Eagle shirts, Paul Mason wines, KLH audio equipment, Scientific American, Advent Corporation, Alvin Duskin dresses, Random House.
Right? It's not that it's a culture of conformity, it's a culture of mass consumption, a factorial modeled, it's just the nature of it. You can't the whole thing began as, advertisers selling to individual consumers. It was very, actually, the original advertisements were much closer to modern influencers, where you'd have the BB King Blues Hour on the radio, and BB King would just be like, I got Johnson and Johnson foot powder. Come buy some of this foot powder. And then, as time went on, the advertising began to reflect the media, and then before long, the production values on the advertising cost more than the money that went into the media that was created itself, or like the shopping network, or any of these other banal and horrible creations. That is the synthesis, that is the apotheosis of it. It's like reality TV. It's an infinite egress into a this is what I meant to mention earlier meant what I meant to mention earlier when I said turning the world into a bunch of chittering robots, is that everything's scripted, right? Doesn't matter where you go, what the workers are supposed to say, what the caller's supposed to say, what the guy knocking on your door is supposed to say, what the government's supposed to say, what the PR is supposed to say, what the lawyers are supposed to say, what the defendant's supposed to say, what the criminal's supposed to say. It's literally all scripted. Every bit of media you see, whether it's a meteorologist or usually even a YouTuber or a someone on social media, it's generally scripted, right? People go, well, what happened to Socrates was kind of right. These kids, they start writing down this gobbledygook, and the next thing you know, they're creating conceptual hallucinations that they can project around the world at light speed power, right?
Publishing. Ours was the most elegant office in town. I was commuting coast to coast weekly, taking 5-day
Ooh,
vacations in
he's a
Tahiti,
classy
eating
Jew.
only in French restaurants, jetting to Europe for a few days skiing.
Sassy
At some
Molassie.
point, not very long into this new career, I began to realize a kind of hollowness in myself. I caught myself smiling.
Drink, Prozac, therapist, priest of industrial system, take the thing, fit back into the thing, squeeze. Uh-oh, you're starting to slip through into the void. There's not much we can do for you. If you go all the way, there's nothing.
Smiling pasty smiles. I noticed that despite all this, I was not having a good time. I think I hit an emotional bottom in 1968 while cruising through the Dalmatian Straits, observing rocky cliffs, rolling seas, dazzling sky, and colors as bright as a desert. Leaning on the deck rail, it struck me that there was a film between me and all of that. I could see the spectacular views. I knew they were spectacular, but the experience stopped at my eyes.
That's what a pretentious culture does, right? It separates the image from the reality. It boggles the mind. It warps the mind. This is earlier when I said it's not that there's good TV you can watch, it's that it's all bad, right? It all is conducive to this intentional warping or programming process. He's going to get to that.
I couldn't let it inside me. I felt nothing. Something had gone wrong with me. I remembered childhood moments when the mere sight of the sky or grass or trees would send waves of physical pleasure through me. Yet now, on this deck, I felt dead. I had the impulse to repeat a phrase that was popular among friends of mine.
Just do what the white girls do. Go down to Brazil, do some sex tourism, drink some ayahuasca, call your doctor in the morning, get on Prozac, buy a new car,
Nature is
a new house.
boring. What was terrifying even then was that I knew the
See,
problem was
I grew up outdoors, and there is a big difference between folks and, the rich tapestry of American life that you generally won't see on American television, except where total triviality or banality, like Married with Children, where it's a totally cynical and borderline hateful show, which, very well captures the society and the people and the media and the people who create the media, right? Because they're the ones who put it out there. So, that's the whole art chasing reality and this kind of loop. I don't know if I said what I meant to say, but we'll keep going.
me, not nature.
Oh, nature. Yeah, nature disappeared a long time ago. Like in the state of nature, in the state of the state, in the state of the commercial, in the state of the production and the corporation state, there is no nature. That disappeared a long time ago, along with human subjectivity and the subject object distinction.
It wasn't that nature was boring, it was that nature had become irrelevant to me, absent from my
You're
life.
relevant.
Through mere
Rock and roll isn't dead. You're dead. If you think rock and roll's dead, you're the one who's dead. There's some kid out there playing his guts out. Maybe he'll get famous. Maybe he'll die poor. Maybe there's some philosopher out there who's writing some paper. He's gonna die poor. But the my point is that there's life out there despite the wasteland that these kind of people have created the world over.
lack of exposure and practice, I'd lost the ability to feel it, tune into it, or care about it. Life moved too fast for that now. If
Yep.
one seeks critical moments to explain
Slow down, everyone. You're moving too fast. Frames can't get you when you're moving like that. I think that's how the song goes.
in later acts, even the writing of books, then perhaps that was one such moment for me. It was clear that I had chosen a fraudulent path toward an equally fraudulent image of a very
Yes,
cold sort of
you're spinners of cobwebs. You're makers of unreality. There's no reason that any of these people should have ever been held in such high esteem, or better yet, back to Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Player Piano in that novel. He writes that a world that where the strongest and most brightest of men are expected to somehow compete with machinery that cannot compete with men, but yet they still have to try to outpace, that we've lost the plot. Now we've reached nihilism where the highest values devalue themselves.
happiness. On balance, though, this big moment was probably less significant than a slowly
Oh,
evolving
and
political
then the consequence of that is that you have all sorts of inept people in positions of power and leadership where, again, they're just actors, they're fakes. Like right now, I bet Ukraine is regretting electing a comedian. Speaking of sitcoms, Zelensky, he was a sitcom star. This is why you don't elect sitcom star. Now you can do that in postmodernity because it's a nihilistic, hateful place of like in between the void, there's a lot of hate, and then good luck finding the love because it's drowned out by the commercial and the need of the commercial. But let's keep going.
awareness that it was no accident that I was feeling the way I was. Engulfed by the 60s. One of my partners in the ad agency was Howard Gossage, a genius of sorts who, for years before he died in 1969, agonized about the absurdity of working in such a profession. I'd hate to go to my grave and be remembered as the man who invented Beethoven sweatshirts or competitions for paper airplanes. He loved to tell the story of the retired ad
Oh
man who once
man, again, I'm wondering who are the people who put Martin Luther King on car commercials. There's a special place. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in hell, but there's a special place in Christian hell for those people.
and said to him, I got out of this business when I woke up one day and didn't give a damn whether they sold more Quaker Oats than I sold cream of wheat.
Good for you, Finnerty.
Gossage knew that there was more to the problem of advertising work than the way it emphasizes trivia. He would rage about the function itself, speaking of it as an invasion of privacy on an order far more
No,
extreme than
no,
merely
no, no. It's just the manufacturing of consent.
rude telephone solicitation. The door-to-door
Oh,
salesperson
I'll be honest. I never understood it. I couldn't understand why people tolerate it. I've been saying no to these people my whole life, just everywhere you go, just in your face. Bye, bye. Look at my children. Bye, bye, bye. Bleh. Whatever it is, right? That I just I thought I was going crazy growing up, going like, how are any of you okay with this? And you realize like, oh, that's the desperation, that's the need. If these people were begging for food or money or so a little bit of attention for their ego, like on social media, it'd be no different, right? You just walk on by, say, sorry, I ain't got nothing for you, I don't have time, don't have right, I got my own problems. Maybe you got a little bit extra, you throw them a few bones, right? It's kind of horrible.
or even the computer file on your
The
credit.
need for the simulation,
It
right?
was an
Shows you
invasion
why.
of the mind which altered behavior, altered people. Advertising expresses a power relationship, Gossage said. One person, the advertiser, invades. Millions absorb. And to what end? So that people will buy something. A deep, profound, and disturbing act by the few against the many for a trivial purpose.
Get out your effing checkbook. That's right.
Still, thrilled by the life I was living, such
They do.
considerations did not at first seem all that
Works.
significant. But the period was the 1960s. While I was showing clients through my paneled offices, a lot of people only slightly younger than I were lying about on the floors of San Francisco auto showrooms, restaurants, and hotels, demanding that these places hire blacks. Across the bay, in Berkeley, students were stopping classes to insist upon participation in university policies. Thousands of others were standing in front of trains carrying war materials for Vietnam, or blocking entryways to draft induction centers. Living in the Bay Area in those years, one could scarcely avoid reflection and even involvement in these goings-on. In my own case, the involvement soon became direct. Since I had been a publicist, I knew many reporters and had a feeling for the nuances of influencing media. Because of that, and through friendship with a number of politically inclined actors in a satirical troupe called The Committee, I began to meet many protest leaders and found myself serving as a part-time media advisor for some of the demonstrations. Like many young lawyers, I was part of what was called the Liberal Support Group. I rarely went so far as actually to demonstrate, or even to
America World Police. Spread them.
visit a demonstration. Instead, I hosted the evening meetings in my office to discuss what was happening. The main concern was how to influence the press to carry stories emphasizing issues rather than disruptions or violence. Here was a typical problem. A group of demonstrators would occupy a hotel lobby, demanding that blacks be hired at front desk jobs rather than bussing dishes in the coffee shop. Newspapers
Oh man, now it's just whites need jobs. Jesus.
and television would run enormous stories about the demonstrations, while editorially denouncing the tactics as counterproductive to what might be worthy aims. The stories concentrated upon
Meaning get in line, suck the red rocket, do as you're told, or else.
sloppy-looking demonstrators, moments of violence, and lengthy statements by officials about law and order. In an entire week's news coverage, there might be one passing reference to the fact that for 40 previous years, the hotel hadn't hired a black person in a visible job. I had no theory of media in those days, and I don't think I was of great service as an advisor. It was clear to me that these demonstrations were not counterproductive. They produced the first news stories ever on such subjects, leading slowly to reforms which might never have happened otherwise. Obviously, the media needed awakening quite as much as everyone else did. Another realization was dawning on me.
Right. So again, going from a trivial culture of conformity and, kind of more corporately controlled to increasingly hostile, rebellious, all these sorts of things.
As I commuted mentally between the interests of the demonstrators I talked to in the evenings and the interests of my commercial clients, I grew more and more impressed with the effect that the mere possession of money has on the kind of information that is dispensed through the media. My evening client
Right, it seems really naive, right? Like, who else was doing the production and distribution? It was always people with money. It was never people, even back to the first people who were writing books. It's like those were the literate, high-class members of society because peasants and slaves didn't read. It's absurd.
clients, speaking of social issues, needed to organize hundreds of people into confrontative acts which could get them extensive, if often unfavorable, coverage. Or if they chose less confrontative routes, they could spend weeks of time and all their hard won nickels and dimes to organize press information programs which would, at the
I remember when a nickel could get you a soda pop, a pizza pie, a movie ticket, a matinee, a girlfriend, and a mortgage.
their most successful, net them a few inches in the back of the newspaper. Meanwhile, any of my daytime clients, speaking for commercial purposes, could and did buy advertising space and time worth tens of thousands of dollars. Then they would do it again the following week. I already knew that in America, all advertisers spent more than $25 billion a year to disseminate their information. Now, however, I was beginning to pay attention to an obvious yet little noticed aspect of this situation. Virtually all of the $25 billion was being spent by people who already had a great deal of money. These were the only people who
Who else
could
would it
afford
be?
to pay $30,000 for one page of advertising in Time,
Or $1 million for Super Bowl?
$54,000 by 1997, or $50,000 for 1 minute of prime television time, $125,000 by 1977. Ordinary people and small businesses, even those which are successful by most standards, can rarely afford any advertising beyond the want ads or a small local retail display. Only the very rich buy mass national advertising, and they do this to become richer. What other motive could they possibly have? A.J. Liebling
Good
once
ones?
said, "Freedom of the press is limited to those who own one." I was learning that access to the press was similarly distorted by the possession
In modern internet terms, it doesn't matter because unless you got the money to project over everyone else, you're just another voice in the herd, right? You're not going to be heard, right? You're not going to get the attention. You're not going to have, anyone who's got money, they got teams like he's illustrating, as I've talked about before on this channel. Anyone in politics and elsewhere, they got media teams, PR teams, image consultants, all that kind of stuff. And, you need it to keep up or compete.
of wealth. People with money had a 25 billion to nearly zero advantage over people without money.
Take
The
that.
rich could simply buy access to the public mind, while the not rich had to seek more circuitous routes.
Techno-feudalism, as
$25 billion
McLuhan coined it.
is nearly as much as the whole country spends on higher education every year. I began to
Okay, 25 billion in 1970-ish, right? 25 billion on advertising was as much as the country spent on education. Get this, I asked the Google robot, and the Google robot told me its answers because it has the data, what was formerly human. But in 2024, nearly 500 billion was spent on advertising, while half that, 250 billion, was spent on general education in America. So it's clear what the real programming is. This is supplemental to make you a consumer. This is to teach you how and what to buy, how and what to desire. And you're going to have trouble if not. But if you still don't fit into that, then don't worry, there's some Prozac or a bottle of vodka, or you can go live under the bridge with the countless other people who are living under the bridge.
realize that a distortion was taking place in the quality and kind of information offered to the public. To a larger and larger extent, people's minds were being occupied by information of a purely commercial nature. As an advertising executive, I was instrumental in furthering this distortion. The
Rondo.
ecology movement
It's
pushed
got
me
what
over the
plants
edge.
create.
Our agency was hired first by the Sierra Club and then by Friends Edge to store nature. As an advertising executive, I was instrumental in furthering this distortion. The ecology movement pushed me over the edge. Our agency was hired first by the Sierra Club and then by Friends of the Earth and other organizations. Unlike most other do good groups, these at least had a
Too
little
good.
money to buy an occasional one shot ad on some critical issue. During the early 1970s, all environmental groups together spent about $500,000 per year in advertising in order to offset an average of about $3 billion in corporate expenditures on the same subject. This ratio was relatively small, only 6,000 to 1, which may
Ecology, he means Brondo, is got what plants crave.
help explain the early success of the environmental movement.
Brought to you by Carl's Jr.
I found myself writing ads about keeping dams out of Grand Canyon, halting the overdevelopment of cities, stopping the development of SSTs, and urging people to stop buying and wearing furs. The ads attacked the prevailing lifestyle of the country, which certainly included my own. They spoke of an inevitable
Right, you create the desire, and after you've created this Frankenstein and this runaway homunculus, now you want to curb it. Now you want to stop. Now that you got the whole world in a great big power gasm over this kind of desire and power and material status and success and what you value and what you promote. Now you want to curb back. Now you want to deny everyone their chance. No, I think what's going to happen instead is that the world is going to tear each other to pieces in pursuit of this kind of fantasy that's been created. But I think it's always been this way.
conflict between corporate growth and the health of the planet. They encouraged a habit of mind which could grasp the interrelationships between all natural systems, including humans. They described a growing environmental destruction which reflected itself in individual lives as well as in economic policy.
They solve for it by cutting people out of the equation, basically. Okay, people are a problem. All right, they won't be able to consume anymore. They won't be able to live anymore.
As I wrote these ads and thought about them, it got harder and harder to separate my new perspective from
Oh,
an
and
awareness that it
if you don't understand that I'm serious when I say that, remember what he said about feeling like there's a screen between him and the world, right? That we create these nihilistic, greedy grubber consumer class of like mindless animals who then wreak havoc in the world and then feel bad about it and then turn around and wreak even more havoc with their meddling, right? That's the moral of the story here.
was in conflict with our corporate
Not
work.
that there is one, but if there
On
was,
Tuesday,
it
I
would
was
be
writing about
immoral.
the impact cars and other technologies had upon the environment, and on Thursday, I was promoting the sale of cars. The crunch came one day
See,
in
just
19
like lawyers, make money off the rich people and the poor people. Have your cake and eat it too. Suckers everywhere. Make your money from the marks.
69 when a young Wall Street Journal reporter named Henry Weinstein called about doing a
Uh-oh.
story
Got to
on
watch
our
out for them.
agency's public service work. By that time, we had gained public attention for having invented a new style of advocacy advertising. Our ads were characterized by coupons urging changes in policy. The coupons could be torn out by readers and sent to corporations and government agencies. They produced enormous volumes of mail on conservation issues that, until then, had been considered the province of bird watchers and little old ladies in tennis shoes. The ads had not only affected policy, they catalyzed and organized the public because they allowed a new level of involvement.
Ugh.
By mailing them, people became more committed to the issue. For once, they were doing something more than feeling bad.
Right. So now you create the illusion that you're helping. And this, what I was trying to say earlier is that there's nothing that can be helped on TV. It's designed for one purpose, right? To make money, to take money, but not to help anyone. And that's kind of what he's going to get into. I'll just give you a heads up because I want to go ahead and stop it here. I've been going for a while. I'll make a part two, maybe a part three. But so far, we've been looking at gerrymander, four arguments for the elimination of television. And we'll pick up next time. But a quick announcement or two, the second poetry reading on the channel here. So if you're a poet and you want to submit your work for me to read on the channel, please do so. That's poets submit your work to sharpersubmissions@gmail.com, like it's spelled, as it sounds, sharpers@gmail.com. And lastly, there was one more thing. Other than that, I just was going to, from here, probably create a few more philosophical React videos, audiobook React videos, assuming I don't get copyright stricken for them. And lastly, there's kind of some actually contemporary issues relevant to modern life that I thought if it might not amuse the any potential watcher, it's at least amusing and fascinating to me because I'm very interested in our world and what goes on in it. From there, if you're new to the channel, thanks for checking it out. If you've been around for a while, one of my handful of subscribers or viewers who even know I exist, thanks for being here. I hope this finds you well. And if we're also fortunate as to be around tomorrow and the day after that, hopefully I will see you then. Take care.